NVIDIA says we are not Enron. And as usual, anytime anyone invokes the name, I am summoned like a spirit to judge what's really going on here. All of the world's biggest companies, with the exception of Apple, have been spending billions, even committing trillions of dollars to an AI-centered build-out. And most of that has benefited, guess who? NVIDIA. They have basically become a data center company. You can see right here that recently all their gaming PC revenue, it's basically like an afterthought. It's not relevant when we're thinking about their overall business. They are all in on AI. And in fact, our entire economy is basically all in on AI. NVIDIA, along with the hyperscalers, make up a huge portion of not only the US economy, but the entire world's economy. So what happens to them matters, not just to people building AI who care about AI, but to everyone, actually, leading to memes like this, which are kind of true. And the CEO even acknowledged it. During a recent earnings report, which they beat, Jensen Huang said that expectations for NVIDIA were sky high and the company was in a no-win position. He nodded to online chatter, saying if we delivered a bad quarter, if we're off by just a hair, if it looked a little bit creaky, the whole world would have fallen apart. There's no question about that, okay? You've seen some of the memes that are on the internet. We're basically holding the planet together, and it's not untrue. And actually, the AI czar of America, David Sachs, agrees. He says, according to today's Wall Street Journal, AI-related investment accounts for half of GDP growth. A reversal would risk a recession. We can't afford to go backwards. In other words, we are all in this boat somehow together. I don't know how or why we're in this boat, but we're all in on AI, whether we like it or not. Whether you like AI, Sora, slop, your 401k is all in. And this is citing a Wall Street Journal article saying how the U.S. economy became hooked on AI spending, because all of these capital expenditures have been massively profitable for NVIDIA, and to a lesser extent, these tech companies, which haven't been making a ton of money from the AI yet compared with their expenses, but have benefited from huge boosts in their stock prices because they're seen as being the future of the future, the AI, basically. And furthering the idea that we're just all in on this one thing, I want to mention that Trump recently signed an executive order launching an AI initiative being compared to the Manhattan Project called the Genesis Mission. This is from the White House.
I think they're way too on the nose. The marketing of this is just not interesting. It's just bad. It's just bland. It's just corporate. And calling it the Manhattan Project of AI? Really? The same project that that gave rise to the atomic bomb. Are you serious? So you are building an atomic bomb, basically.
They talk about
and you say that out loud with your corpo speak. That's crazy.
Building an integrated AI platform to harness federal scientific data sets. And
that is out of the world.
With all the
That's crazy.
Companies, Google, NVIDIA, Anthropic, AMD, Microsoft, AWS. This is all the table stakes we're dealing with.
Right.
You have to know that AI, and specifically NVIDIA, is a gigantic part of our economy. And our White House acknowledges that it's basically the only thing keeping us from a recession right now. With most people feeling like they already are in a recession because of their earnings being stagnant and because of inflation ripping. But I want to talk about NVIDIA's response, because obviously that sets the stage for the "we are not Enron" claim, because there have been questions boiling up about all of this investment. Is it worth it? Is anyone doing anything suspicious? So we saw NVIDIA sent a report to certain outlets basically fighting back on the FUD. And two of their source documents were a guy on X, aka Michael Burry, the guy from The Big Short, who's recently been criticizing them, and another article which said the algorithm that detected a $610 billion fraud, how machine intelligence exposed the AI industry's circular financing scheme. Now, I want to specifically talk about Michael Burry because he's the main thing they're responding to. He has been kind of shaking up the industry with an interesting critique that I don't think a lot of people have focused on. So far, a lot of the criticism about AI bubbles has been that AI is not as impactful as we thought, or that it is being overhyped.
It's not being impactful
but Michael Burry
at all.
comes to it from a very different angle. And I want to talk about his Substack articles he's been putting out. He's recently become a blogger, a bit of an influencer recently after he shut down his hedge fund. And so now he can publicly comment on these types of issues. Now, I'll obviously link below to his articles, but understand they are paid. I think it's like $390 for the year. So I bought it for you, so you don't have to. I'm going to be talking about it. But let me just say, he's a great writer. I'm not going to feature much of it because obviously it's paywalled stuff. But I just want to give you the basic arguments so we can talk about the implication of what NVIDIA is really so worried about. So the first thing Michael Burry lays out is a primer on the dot-com bubble, which he calls a supply-side gluttony. And the main thing he lays out is the idea that the original dot-com bubble from 1999, 2000 that everyone remembers is sort of misremembered. It's sort of like one of these Mandela effect things where everyone's collective memory is not quite what really happened. If you ask your average person, if you ask even me what the dot-com bubble was about, I'd probably mention something like pets.com, some of these dot-com businesses that had no revenues and basically were complete vaporware that were trading at massive valuations that didn't support anything. And this is what the AI defenders say when you bring up the dot-com bubble, the massive amounts of spending. They might quote someone like Jerome Powell, who says that unlike the dot-com bubble, AI spending isn't a bubble. Quote, I won't go into particular names, but they actually have earnings. The idea being that back in the pets.com days, the Ask Jeeves days, there wasn't actual revenues to support the valuations. Unlike here, you actually have companies like Google who are making tons of money. So it's just kind of not the same thing. And Michael Burry argues that that's actually not true, that the dot-com bubble was a lot more about overbuilt infrastructure from companies that were profitable. Specifically, he brings up Cisco Systems, which was one of the most valuable companies in the year 2000, and specifically was valued based on a lot of their interconnecting equipment sales for the internet, the future, basically. And a lot of the narrative at the time was that the internet is the future, so you have to invest massively in infrastructure for the future. And because of that, there was a massive overbuild. And that all blew up when there just wasn't the demand to meet the supply. And everyone had found out that they had overspent on a bunch of infrastructure that wasn't going to be used. So Burry says, hey, look, these dot-com companies that everyone likes to cite, they weren't big companies, big players in the game. The biggest players who were leading the large cap did have revenues. It was just all based on an overspend on infrastructure. And he argues the same thing is happening with AI. I should also mention there's a lot of talk about the WorldCom scandal, which is basically a telecommunication company. And their big thing was essentially accounting fraud. They basically moved line items from the expenses category to the assets and made it seem like they were more profitable than they were. Okay, so to zoom out, what does this all have to do with NVIDIA, right? Why are we talking about the dot-com bubble? Well, Michael Burry is basically making a two-pronged case so far, which is one, that there's a ton of overbuilding on supply, just like there was for the early
They're
internet.
building
That's not
data
necessarily
centers
tied
like crazy.
to any revenues, and that's going to become a huge problem. And secondly, he thinks there are some accounting tricks that are happening that is basically overstating revenues. This is in his next post called Unicorns and Cockroaches, Blessed Fraud. This is where he takes a deep look on the depreciation of GPUs. Now, GPUs are basically the lifeblood of NVIDIA. This is what they're selling primarily to these data centers. This is what's doing a lot of the AI compute. And recently, there has been an accounting change in how these things are depreciated. Basically, several of the major companies have been shifting their depreciation costs on GPUs from 3 years to about 6 years, or 4 years to 6 years. And this basically has the effect of increasing stated earnings because you are depreciating slow. So if you lengthen the amount of time that you can depreciate something over, your earnings during those years are going to increase. And the problem, of course, is if the actual life cycle of the thing is not as long as
it doesn't last 6 years
because
most
it
of the
will
time.
make investors think you have assets that really aren't assets, basically. Now, I should say, not everyone agrees this is a mistake. Some people say that there's a justification for this, that several of these old chips are actually being used in what's called Inference for these AI models. But today I want to take a look at that because that is where I think Burry's arguments cut the most true. I don't see why we think GPU life cycles are going to be longer instead of shorter in today's age. I don't think there's any evidence for that. And that leads to Michael Burry's whole argument. He says, responding to NVIDIA's claim that they are not Enron, quote, I am not claiming that NVIDIA is Enron. It's clearly Cisco. And this is obviously referencing the idea that the criticism here is that this is an infrastructure overbuild out. All this commitment for massive, massive, massive data centers, the likes of which we've never seen, before there is revenues to support it for the hyperscalers like Google, Amazon, Microsoft. It just doesn't make sense. And that's his argument. It's not a question of whether AI is real or not. It's just a question of, do you need this before there is demand for it? But now we're going to dive deep into this criticism of depreciation. Basically, these GPUs are not valuable past a few years, or are they valuable for 6 years? Because NVIDIA said in their whole response to Michael Burry and the haters, they said, rebutting this claim, some companies have increased useful life estimates to reflect the fact that GPUs remain useful and profitable for longer than originally anticipated, in many cases for 6 years or more. But this, even for me, rang very hollow because I've seen podcasts where the CEO of NVIDIA is talking about how they're not slowing down the pace of development, they're actually accelerating it. And they're actually introducing an annual cycle for putting out new chips now, which is faster than ever before. So if anything, the pace at which your GPUs will become outdated is not slower than before. It's actually arguably faster than before.
So the first thing is, because the token generation rate is going up so incredibly, two exponentials on top of each other, we have to, unless we increase the performance at incredible rates, the cost of token generation will keep growing because Moore's law is dead, right? Because transistors basically cost the same every single year now. And power is largely the same between those two fundamental laws, unless we come up with new technologies to drive the cost down. Even if there's a slight difference in growth, you give somebody a discount of a few percent, how's that going to make up for two exponentials? And so we have to increase our performance annually at a pace that keeps up with that exponential.
Now I want to pause here because basically what he's saying is we are accelerating in order to keep pace with the demand. But this acceleration also means that if you previously, your GPU would sort of become irrelevant in several years, it's actually going to become irrelevant even faster now. And you can kind of see here how the performance of some of their products has increased over time and decreased the amount of energy you need to generate a token. And that's going to become really relevant because, as you'll see, part of the problem for these data centers is the cost per watt. Basically, the electricity cost fundamentally is what you're pushing against. And so as these GPUs get more powerful or get more efficient per watt, then you're going to have to replace it. Otherwise, you're just not competitive with the general marketplace. And alongside that, now we can listen to Jensen explain why this performance increase eventually means that other people's GPUs are literally not worth running because they're so much less efficient than these new models or new GPUs.
Of people where you say our competitors building ASICs, they could literally, all their chips are cheaper already today, but they could literally price them at zero. Our objective is they could price them at zero, and you would still buy an NVIDIA system because the total cost of operating that system, power, data center, land, etc., the intelligence out is still a better bet than buying
because
a chip, even if it's given to you for free.
Because the land, power, and shell is already $15 billion.
Right.
Let's just think about it from a perspective of revenues.
Yes.
Okay. So everybody's power limited. And let's say you were able to secure 2 more gigawatts of power. Well, that 2 gigawatts of power, you would like to have translate to revenues.
Yes.
So your performance or tokens per
This is so
watt
boring.
was twice as high as somebody else.
I have to say, Jensen is the CEO with the least aura out of all. What are these pink, red, opaque red glasses? What is this? How does it fit onto your Chinese face? What is this, bro?
This is token per watt.
And this is where I'm very sympathetic to Burry's argument, where NVIDIA sort of wants to have it both ways. They want to have a long lifespan for their products, but they also want an insane annual cycle pace, which is accelerating ever faster. And literally they're saying, look, you can't even buy our competitors' chips because performance per watt, it's not even worth running them. But you could also say if they keep increasing the pace of their development this fast, then they're actually cutting against what? Their old chips too. It's not just their competitors' chips. It's their own chips are not worth running. And so that's the whole argument for this depreciation cycle not making sense. And if it doesn't make sense, what happens to everyone's earnings? All these hyperscalers, well, they would be overstated. They actually aren't what they thought, and they are much lower. which would mean that their market price would go down. So
Drop slightly.
ironically, NVIDIA is sort of cutting off the very tree that they're standing on, in part because they are making their chips less useful faster because of their development pace. Now, the question, of course, is, well, can they slow down? Not really, because Google is right on their heels with Gemini 3, which they supposedly developed with just their in-house TPUs, which, funny enough, the NVIDIA newsroom actually commented on, saying, we are delighted by Google's success. They have made great advances in AI, and we continue to supply to Google. NVIDIA is a generation ahead of the industry. It's the only platform that runs every model and does it everywhere computing is done. But within this, a lot of people sensed a cope. They were trying to just kind of reassure everybody, hey guys, we're still the best, right? But the question is, are they going to be the best forever? And so they really can't stop the pace, which ironically is going to hurt their customers who have to constantly cycle through these chips in order to be competitive with the rest of the industry. I should also notice that there are also cheaper open source Chinese models that are getting quite good. There's something called Kimi K2. And the question ultimately is not whether AI is a thing, at least not according to Michael Burry, but rather whether NVIDIA is worth all this capital expenditure, whether it makes sense, whether they are overbuilding, whether a company that is primarily valued on their data center revenue, whether those data centers are going to make money. Because if it doesn't, basically our entire economy is built on this. It's built on this giant scale up. And even our government officials acknowledge that and say, we can't afford to go backwards. In other words, we sort of can't afford this not to work out. And yeah, that's basically the story of NVIDIA. Actually,
that's crazy. Sounds like a really great recession in the building.
I do have to admit, I agree with them. They're not Enron, ultimately, after looking at the evidence, but maybe they are Cisco. Maybe a little bit, or maybe not at all. I don't know. Ultimately, I'm a YouTuber, Cisco. Maybe a little bit, or maybe not at all. I don't know.
Again, what the fuck is this? What the fuck is this eyewear choice? What are these glasses? Why does he have pinkish glasses? What is this?
Ultimately, I'm a YouTuber, but I am...
I hope that when the whole thing goes bust, this is the image that they put. I hope this image becomes a meme. Like, bro,
no.
What is this? What are you doing, bro? This is gonna be like... There are gonna be headlines with this image and, you know, 2026, great recession. Or maybe it takes a bit more. The thing is, you know, it's very difficult to time recessions. But it's boiling up for sure. And I hope it's remembered with this image.
Ultimately, I'm a YouTuber, but I am compelled by the idea that the depreciation on these chips, if NVIDIA is able to accelerate their development of chips as fast as they say, I think this whole 6-year thing really doesn't make sense at all. Now, the effect that might be having, whether that's significant enough to really matter, whether...
I mean, the rest case is that he expects token generation, so LLM usage, to grow exponentially even further. That is the main thing, I think. I'm not sure you need all of those tokens. That is, in my opinion, the most difficult thing to predict. That is, in my opinion, the make or break thing. You know, you can project the exponential to go on forever, but, you know, at a certain point, it's going to flat out. Just as the scaling laws, I think I recently saw that scaling law is dead. Will there be an exponentially increasing demand going on still with LLMs? I see a lot of people being fed up with LLMs. I see LLMs being used improperly. You know, you have Google search, which could just change its UI a little bit, and that would, you know, make a lot of LLM queries just inefficient. Yeah, kind of weird situation.